The smell of printer toner and cold coffee. Those were the twin signatures of every meaningful morning in Marcus Hale's life. And this one? A gray Tuesday in November, the kind where the sky looked like wet concrete that had dried wrong, was no different, except that on this particular Tuesday, a FedEx envelope had arrived at his desk containing the last piece of a 14-month puzzle. He didn't open it right away. That was the thing about Marcus that most people, even people who had known him for years, fundamentally misunderstood. They looked at the sharp jaw, the measured cadence of his speech, the way he never laughed too loudly in a room full of laughter. And they assumed coldness. They assumed damage, or arrogance, or some combination of the two. What they were actually looking at was patience, the particular, but lethal kind that takes 11 years to build and understands that the best time to make a move is never when you feel it most acutely. He poured his second cup of coffee, the real kind, not the espresso machine his assistant kept pushing him toward, and sat down at his desk in the offices of Hartwell and Crane Financial Forensics. The FedEx envelope sat in front of him. His name was printed on the label in the clean, impersonal font of a courier service that had no idea what it was delivering. He opened it. Inside was a single printed document. A property appraisal for a residence at 14 Carrington Lane, Westbrook County. A 6-bedroom house with a pool and a guest house, appraised at $4.2 million. The address was one he knew. He had helped negotiate the zoning variance for it in 2019, and back when he was still a partner at Meridian Group, and the world was a different shape. The property belonged, technically, to a shell company called Sable Meridian Holdings, LLC. The name of the registered agent was Vivian Ashford. Not Hale. She had gone back to her maiden name 11 months ago. He had expected that. What he had not expected, or rather, what he had expected but had waited patiently to confirm, was the shell company. That was new. That was interesting. That was the kind of thing a person does when they believe no one is watching. Marcus set the document down and looked out his office window at the gray Philadelphia skyline. A pigeon was sitting on the ledge, utterly unbothered by the wind. He thought about the photographs. He always came back to the photographs. It had started 7 months ago. Yet when his former college roommate, a man named Porter Walsh, who worked in tech and had a weakness for Instagram and no social boundaries whatsoever, had sent him a screenshot with the message, "Dude, did you see what she did?" Marcus had looked at the screenshot for a long time. It was a photograph from their wedding. August 15th, 6 years ago, at the Belmont Estate in Connecticut. He remembered the day clearly, the specific weight of the August humidity, the way Vivian's dress had caught the afternoon light, the smell of the hydrangeas her mother had insisted on. In the original photograph, Marcus stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back, both of them looking at something slightly off-camera. He remembered what they were looking at. Her father had tried to light a cigar and had singed his own eyebrow. Oh, and the entire wedding party had dissolved into laughter. In the version Vivian had posted, Marcus was gone. Not blurred, not pixelated. Gone. She had hired someone, a professional retoucher, Marcus had later confirmed, not some amateur with a phone app, to remove him cleanly from the photograph. The lighting had been corrected, the shadows adjusted. His hand at her back had been replaced with what appeared to be the natural fall of her dress. If you had never seen the original, you would never know anyone had been standing there. He had gone through her social media archives that same night. Methodically, without emotion, the way he approached every problem that mattered. She had done it to all of them. Their honeymoon in Kyoto. She was standing alone at the Fushimi Inari gates, her red coat vivid against the stone. Her smile aimed at a space that had once held a person. A charity gala from 4 years ago. She was laughing at a table with friends, and Marcus had been removed so precisely that the wingback chair beside her showed not even a crease from where he had been sitting. Their trip to Cape Town. Her birthday at a restaurant in Midtown, where the light had been so bad that the photographs had all come out grainy and yellow, and still she had paid someone to erase him from every single one. 14 months of their 6-year marriage, systematically, quietly. She had rebuilt her photographic history as if Marcus Hale had never existed. He had sat with that for a while. He had let it land. He was not a man who pretended emotions didn't exist. He had simply learned a long time ago to treat them like weather. You don't fight the rain, but you note it. You account for it. You decide whether to bring an umbrella or let it soak you. On the night he looked at those photographs and understood what Vivian had done, he let it soak him for exactly 45 minutes. He poured a glass of the mid-shelf bourbon he kept in his desk for exactly this kind of occasion. The expensive stuff was for celebrating, the middle shelf was for sitting with hard truths. And he looked out his apartment window at the city, and he let himself feel the full specific weight of what it meant that the woman he had loved for 9 years had hired a professional to remove him from the visual record of their shared life. Then he poured a second glass, and he started thinking. Because there was a reason Vivian was doing this. Vivian Ashford, and she was Ashford again now, and he needed to keep reminding himself that was the point. Did not do things without a reason. She was one of the most deliberately constructed people he had ever known. Everything she did was in service of the image she was building, which meant the erasure wasn't grief. It wasn't some desperate attempt to heal. It was preparation. She was preparing the ground for something new. He had figured out what that something was approximately 6 weeks later when he saw a photograph posted by a mutual acquaintance from a charity dinner in Manhattan. In the photograph, Vivian stood with a group of people he mostly recognized and one he didn't. Late 50s, silver-haired, the kind of tan you get from actual travel rather than a booth, wearing a suit that had been made for his body specifically and recently. And he was looking at Vivian with a particular quality of attention that Marcus recognized immediately, not because he was possessive or paranoid, but because he was observant, and because he had once looked at Vivian exactly that way himself. He ran the man's face through every search available to him and came back with a name in under 4 minutes. Dominic Thorne. Dominic Thorne, 61, founder and majority stakeholder of Thorne Capital Group, one of the 10 largest private real estate development firms on the East Coast. Net worth estimated between $800 million and $1.2 billion, depending on the cycle and who was doing the estimating. Recently widowed, his wife of 32 years, Catherine Thorne née Bellamy, had died of pancreatic cancer 18 months ago. No children from the marriage. One estranged nephew in California. Marcus had looked at all of this information for a long time. Then he had called his attorney, a woman named Elena Park, who had handled his divorce, and who had the rare quality of being both genuinely intelligent and genuinely unbothered by complexity. "I need you to pull something for me," he said. "Not urgent, but thorough." Define thorough. "I want to know everything about the financial architecture of Thorne Capital Group. Public filings, any registered subsidiaries, any recent estate or trust instruments filed in New York or Connecticut. And I want to know if there's a company called Sable Meridian Holdings anywhere in that architecture." There had been a pause. Elena was good at pauses. She used them the way a surgeon uses silence in the operating room, not as emptiness, but as precision. Marcus, she said. Yeah. Are you building something, or are you just looking? He had thought about the photographs. About 14 months of systematic erasure. About Vivian standing alone at the Fushimi Inari gates in her red coat with her clean, edited smile. I'm looking, he said. For now. That had been 7 months ago. He picked up the FedEx envelope again and slid the property appraisal back inside with the care of someone handling a document that was going to matter. Then he opened his laptop and typed a message to Elena. I have the property appraisal. Can you meet this week? I think we're ready to move. He sent the message, refilled his coffee, and looked back out at the gray Philadelphia sky. The pigeon was still there. He found that oddly appropriate. To understand why any of this mattered, but you had to understand the specific mechanics of how Marcus Hale and Vivian Ashford had come apart. Not the emotional mechanics. Those were real, and they had their own texture. But they were not the point. The point was the financial mechanics, the structural mechanics, the specific way that two people can build a life together and then, in the process of dismantling it, reveal what they actually believed about each other and about themselves. Marcus had met Vivian at a law school event in 2011. He wasn't in law school. He had finished his MBA at Wharton 2 years earlier and was working his way up the analytical ladder at a boutique investment firm in Center City. But his friend at Penn Law had dragged him to the event because Marcus was good at talking to people, and Penn Law events were, apparently, or chronically short of people who were good at talking to people. Vivian had been in her 2nd year. She was studying corporate law with what appeared, at the time, to be genuine passion. She was clever and quick, and had a way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room without appearing to try, which Marcus had immediately recognized as a skill and had admired anyway, because recognizing a skill does not diminish its effect. They had dated for 2 years before moving in together. He had been making enough by then to cover most of the expense of a nice apartment in Rittenhouse Square, but Vivian had insisted on splitting costs evenly, and he had respected that. She had graduated and taken a position at a mid-size corporate firm. She was good at the work. She liked the structure of contracts, just the way language could be made to mean very specific things if you were precise enough, and Marcus had always felt a kind of recognition in that preference, because it was exactly how he felt about numbers. They had been good together. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself, in the privacy of his own accounting of events. They had been genuinely good together for a long time. Not perfect. They were both too self-contained for the kind of easy emotional fluency that makes some couples look effortless, but good. Honest, he had believed. Substantive. He had proposed in Kyoto, in the spring of 2016, on the path to the Arashiyama bamboo grove, in the early morning before the crowds arrived, and when the light was the particular green that only bamboo makes, and the sound of the wood against itself in the wind was the only sound in the world. Vivian had said yes, and then laughed, and the laugh had been completely unguarded, completely real. And he had known in that moment that whatever else was true, this was also true. They had married in August and started building the specific shared architecture of a dual-income couple with serious professional ambitions and a genuine interest in building wealth, not for display, but as a practical foundation. Marcus moved to Meridian Group as a senior partner in 2018. Vivian made partner at her firm in 2019. They bought a house in Chestnut Hill, not the 6-bedroom Carrington Lane property, but a solid 4-bedroom colonial with good bones and a study that Marcus had converted into something between a home office and a library. He had been happy, or near enough that the distinction felt academic. And then, sometime in the second year of the pandemic, something shifted. He couldn't point to a single moment. He had tried, in the long, quiet months after the divorce, to locate it, to find the specific scene where the frame broke. But there wasn't one. It was more like a sound frequency that slowly drifts out of range. The conversations that used to carry had started to land flat. The easy physical comfort of their shared space had developed small pockets of coldness. Vivian had started working longer hours, which he had initially attributed to legitimate case pressure, and then had started attending more events. Fundraisers, some professional dinners, gallery openings, that she attended alone, because she said Marcus wouldn't enjoy them, which was probably true, but also hadn't been a consideration before. He had noticed. He was a person who noticed things. But he had also been raised in a family where you didn't name something until you were certain, because naming it made it real, and he hadn't been certain yet. He had been hoping for a different explanation. The different explanation had stopped being available to him on a Friday night in March 2022, when he had come home from a red-eye from Chicago to find Vivian in the kitchen, on the phone, turned away from the door, speaking in the low, particular register that people use when they believe they are alone. He had heard 4 words before she heard him come in and ended the call. "I know, Dominic. I know." He had stood in the doorway of his own kitchen for a moment. The overhead light was flickering. It had been flickering for weeks, and he had been meaning to replace the bulb. And in the stuttering light, Vivian had turned to look at him, and her expression had done something complicated that he hadn't had a name for at the time, but understood better now. It was the expression of a person caught between 2 versions of their own life. He had not said anything that night. He had put his bag down and gone to bed and lain awake until 4 in the morning, while his mind did the particular kind of rapid, precise calculation it did when the data had changed and the model needed to be rebuilt. By the time the sky outside had started to lighten, he had arrived at several conclusions. First, the affair had been ongoing for some time. Yes, the ease and familiarity in those 4 words, "I know, Dominic, I know," said in that specific tone, the tone of someone finishing a thought rather than starting one, was not the ease of something new. Second, Vivian had not been careless. She was not a careless person. The fact that he had overheard anything at all was an aberration. And aberrations of that kind tended to mean something was changing. The affair was either ending or it was becoming something else, something larger, something that required a different shape. Third, he needed information before he needed anything else, not confrontation, information. He had spent the following 2 weeks being exactly as normal as he could manage, which, given that he was already fairly contained by nature, was probably more convincing than it would have been for someone more expressive. He watched Vivian with the particular attention of a person who is seeing something for the first time while pretending to see the familiar. He noted the careful geometry of her phone usage, always face down on surfaces, always taken into the bathroom, always clicked to black before being set down. He noted the small improvements in her wardrobe, the new perfume that was different from the one she had been wearing for 3 years, the slight change in her energy on certain evenings that was not the energy of work stress. He had not hired a private investigator. He hadn't needed to. He had done what he was actually trained to do, which was to follow financial signals, and financial signals did not lie. What he had sat down one afternoon with 6 months of their joint credit card statements, the account she used for what she called personal expenses, the line items he rarely examined because he had trusted her, and trust, he was learning, is essentially a decision to leave certain doors unexamined. And he had gone through every charge with the same attention he gave to a client's audit. The picture that emerged was unambiguous. Regular charges to a hotel in Midtown Manhattan that he knew by reputation as a place that served excellent food and also offered the kind of discretion that certain clientele required. Not frequent enough to be reckless, but consistent enough to be a pattern. Once, sometimes twice a month, always on weekdays when travel for work could absorb the explanation. On charges to a wine bar in the West Village that Vivian had mentioned once, casually, as a place her colleague liked. Charges to a jeweler on East 61st Street that were small enough, 300 here, 400 there, to be explainable as gifts or personal treats, but which, laid against the map of the other charges, told a different story. He had cross-referenced the dates against Vivian's calendar, which synced to their shared iCloud account, which she had either forgotten about or believed he never checked. Most of the dates were labeled client dinner or deposition prep, or simply NYC work. One date, in October, was labeled nothing at all. That was the one that stuck with him, because Vivian labeled everything. The empty space on her calendar in October was against a hotel charge in Midtown and a dinner charge at a restaurant in the West Village that cost $412, was the most honest thing she had put in that calendar in some time. He had filed for divorce in May 2022. He had been calm about it, controlled. He had called Elena first, laid out what he knew and what he suspected, and Elena had listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he most valued about her. When he finished, she had asked him one question. "What do you want out of this?" He had thought about it carefully. The house in Chestnut Hill, their investment accounts, the equity in Meridian Group that he had built over 6 years, the specific, practical assets of two people who had both been high earners and who had made most of their significant purchases together. "I want what's mine," he said. "Exactly what's mine, nothing more. But I want to make absolutely certain that nothing of mine ends up somewhere it shouldn't." He had meant that in 2 directions. One direction was the straightforward one. He wanted a fair accounting of their shared assets, and he wanted it to be precise, because precision was the only thing that stood between a fair outcome and a manipulated one. Vivian was a corporate attorney. She understood documents and structures and the legal geography of financial instruments. She would know how to make assets disappear inside the architecture of the settlement if he wasn't paying attention. He was paying attention. The second direction was longer, quieter. He filed it away in the part of his mind that was always running a secondary thread. That's the part that his former business professor had once called his background processor, because Marcus was the kind of person whose mind was never fully idle, never fully present in just one calculation. He had a feeling, not evidence yet, just a feeling. The professional instinct of someone who had spent a career reading the patterns in financial data, that Dominic Thorne was not just an affair, he was a destination. And if Vivian was moving toward a destination of that particular magnitude, she would have already started preparing the terrain, which meant Marcus had time. Not unlimited time, but enough. The divorce had taken 14 months. It was not a clean process, and Marcus had not expected it to be, because clean processes are for people who have nothing to protect, and Vivian had something to protect. Said he had known it, and she had known that he knew it, which created a specific quality of tension in the proceedings that Elena had once described, with characteristic understatement, as lively. The core dispute was the house and the investment accounts. The Chestnut Hill house had been purchased in their joint names in 2019 for $1.1 million. In the 3 years since, its value had risen to approximately $1.7. Vivian wanted the house. She had made this clear early and consistently, framing it in terms of stability and attachment, which Marcus understood to be partly genuine and partly strategic, because Vivian rarely operated with only one motive. The investment accounts were more complex. They held a combined value of approximately $2.3 million in a mix of equities, bonds, and a stake in a private fund that Marcus had brought them into through a Meridian connection. Vivian's position was that the accounts should be split 50-50. Marcus's position was that the fund stake was not a liquid asset, and its valuation for purposes of the split needed to account for the lockup period and the performance conditions that applied to his specific class of units. They had argued about this for 8 months through their respective attorneys. The fund stake was real, and the lockup period was real, but it was not primarily about the fund stake. Marcus had long since understood that financial disputes in divorces are almost never primarily about what they appear to be about. They are about leverage. The fund stake was leverage. Vivian holding out on the house was leverage, and the actual negotiation was happening in the space between the stated positions, in the territory of what each party would accept to make the process end. What Marcus was actually doing during those 8 months was watching. He was watching where Vivian was spending her time and her energy. He was watching the pattern of her attorney's document requests, which told him what she was worried about, because lawyers request documents about things their clients are worried about. He was watching the public record for any new corporate registrations in New York or Connecticut or Delaware connected to Vivian's name or any variant of it. He found the first one in month 4 of the proceedings, a Delaware LLC called Ashford Strategic Capital, registered to an address that was the office of a New Jersey accountant named Leonard Bright, who appeared in 3 separate LinkedIn connections between Vivian and the Thorn Capital Group organizational chart. The LLC had no public assets and no obvious purpose. He found the second one in month 9, Sable Meridian Holdings, registered in Connecticut with the same registered agent. He had brought both findings to Elena, and Elena had made a sound that was not quite a whistle, but suggested one. "What is she doing with them?" Elena asked. "I don't know yet," Marcus said. "But I know what she's planning to do with them." "Tell me." "She's building a receiving structure. She's going to move assets into these entities before the divorce closes, declare them as separate or premarital in the settlement, and then use them to hold property post-settlement. The Delaware LLC probably already has something in it. Plus the Connecticut one is newer. I think that one is tied to the Thorn relationship specifically." Elena had been quiet for a moment. "Can we prove it?" "Not yet. I need the appraisal on the Connecticut property first." The appraisal had arrived this morning in the FedEx envelope, $4.2 million, titled in the name of Sable Meridian Holdings, and based on the timing, the entity had been registered 8 months ago, during the active divorce proceedings. Marcus had a very specific theory about where the money to acquire it had come from. He met Elena for lunch on Thursday at a restaurant on Walnut Street that they both liked because it was quiet enough for a real conversation and loud enough that no one could overhear one. She was already at the table when he arrived. Estou was drinking sparkling water and reading something on her phone with the concentrated expression she wore when she was annoyed by what she was reading. "The thing from Westbrook County," she said when he sat down. "Yeah. I had a title search done this morning. The property was purchased 11 months ago for $3.8 million. The deed is titled in Sable Meridian Holdings. The purchase was financed entirely in cash, no mortgage." Marcus ordered coffee from the passing server without looking away from Elena. $3.8 million in cash, he said. 11 months ago. 11 months ago, you were in month 3 of your divorce proceedings. We were. And at that point in the proceedings, Elena said, with the careful, precise tone of someone who has spent years translating implications into language, the combined value of your joint investment accounts had not yet been formally disclosed. It had not. She picked up her water glass. Marcus, where did the money come from? That's what I'm going to find out. He picked up the menu and set it back down without reading it. I already know most of it, actually. I just need one more document to make it definitive. Elena looked at him. I need the estate plan, he said. She put her water glass down. Dominic Thorne's estate plan. Or the trust instrument, whichever one Vivian is named in. Because she's named in one of them. I'm certain of it. The property purchase is too clean, too large, and too perfectly timed to be anything other than a gift from someone with significant disposable capital who had a specific reason to put real estate in a structure bearing her name. If Thorne gifted her $3.8 million in real estate during your divorce proceedings, then she had an undisclosed marital asset, the funds that were used on her behalf during a period when our joint finances were under court oversight, were moved through structures that were never disclosed in the mandatory financial affidavits. Elena was quiet for a moment. That's financial fraud in a divorce proceeding, she said. It is. It's also potentially gift tax exposure. If Thorne transferred $3.8 million in assets to her without a qualified gift structure, he would have structured it through the trust, Marcus said. Or through a corporate entity. He's not careless, but the question isn't whether he structured it carefully. The question is whether the existence of the transfer was disclosed to our divorce court. And it wasn't. I have the full financial affidavit Vivian submitted in month 6. I've been over it 4 times. There is no disclosure of any interest in Sable Meridian Holdings. No disclosure of any real property in Westbrook County. No disclosure of any interest in a Delaware LLC. The server came back with Marcus's coffee. He waited until the server was gone. I want to file a motion to reopen the financial disclosure phase, he said. Elena nodded slowly. She was doing the legal arithmetic in real time, which was her gift. We'd need to demonstrate newly discovered evidence that was concealed during the original proceedings. And the property appraisal, the title search, the LLC registrations, that's the foundation. We'd file a motion for contempt and for modification of the settlement. And we'd file a complaint with the state bar. Elena looked at him steadily. She's an attorney, Marcus said. She submitted false financial disclosures to a court. That's not just a civil matter. No, Elena agreed. It's not. He drank his coffee. The restaurant was filling up around them, the lunch crowd with their briefcases and their noise, the ordinary machinery of a Thursday in the city. There's something else, he said. There usually is with you. He almost smiled. The Delaware LLC, Ashford Strategic Capital. I had a forensic accountant trace the capitalization. She used $240,000 from our joint savings account in October of 2021. It's 7 months before I filed. She transferred it in 3 separate transactions, each just under the threshold that would have triggered automatic flagging, and she moved it to a personal account she opened in 2020, and from there to the LLC. I have the bank records. Elena set her water glass down with more force than was strictly necessary. October 2021, she said. You were still married. We were still married. She moved $240,000 of joint marital assets into a private entity without your knowledge or consent. Correct. There was a pause. And you have the bank records. I have the bank records. Elena took a breath. Then she picked up her phone and began typing a note to herself. The rapid and purposeful typing of someone who has just identified the shape of a case and wants to capture it before anything shifts. I need to prepare you for something, she said without looking up. Go ahead. This is going to be public. Once we file, the motion becomes a matter of court record. Financial fraud in a divorce proceeding. If we can substantiate what you're saying, and it sounds like you can, this doesn't stay quiet. Her firm will find out, her colleagues. Dominic Thorne. Marcus looked out the window at Walnut Street, where the November light was doing something particular to the pavement, making it look almost like polished stone. I know, he said, and you're comfortable with that. He thought about the photographs, about the professional retoucher who had been paid to adjust the shadows where he had once stood, about the wedding photograph and the Kyoto photograph and the birthday photograph in the grainy yellow restaurant light, about the care and thoroughness of the erasure, the hours it must have taken, the deliberateness of it, the statement it made. I'm comfortable with it, he said. What Marcus had not told Elena, not yet, because there was a part of the architecture that needed to come together first, was the full picture of what he understood about Dominic Thorne. He had been watching Dominic Thorne for 7 months. Not the way people mean when they use that phrase loosely, not some obsessive surveillance, nothing irregular. But with the particular sustained attention of a financial forensics professional who has identified a subject of interest and wants to understand them completely before making any move. When Thorne Capital Group's public filings were extensive and largely clean. Dominic was a serious operator. He had built his empire over 30 years through a combination of genuine real estate acumen and the kind of relationship capital that only comes from being consistently reliable over a long period of time. He was not a fraud. He was not a corrupt operator in any obvious sense. He was simply a very wealthy, recently widowed man who had apparently allowed a charming, calculating woman to insert herself into his life. Marcus did not hate Dominic Thorne. He had thought about this carefully in the way he thought about all potentially emotional conclusions, and he had arrived at the absence of hatred with some certainty. Dominic Thorne was not the architect of the damage. He was the vehicle, or the mechanism through which Vivian had decided to construct her next version of life, just as Marcus had been the mechanism through which she had constructed the version before it. What Marcus felt toward Dominic Thorne was closer to something like concern. And that concern had a very specific foundation. He had learned, through a combination of public records research, financial analysis, and a conversation with a contact who worked in estate law in New York, that Dominic Thorne had recently completed a revision of his estate plan. The revision had been completed 9 months ago, 2 months after Catherine Thorne's death, and 7 months before the property at 14 Carrington Lane appeared in a structure bearing Vivian's name. And the revision had included the creation of a revocable living trust and the designation of a new primary beneficiary for the pour-over will that would transfer any remaining assets into the trust at death. The identity of the new primary beneficiary was not a matter of public record, but the timing was telling. And the property at Carrington Lane was telling. And the specific legal architecture of Sable Meridian Holdings, a Connecticut LLC, formed under the provisions that made it particularly resistant to outside claims in cases of divorce or civil judgment, was extremely telling. Vivian was not just having an affair. She was not just trying to position herself financially in the divorce. She was building toward a specific endgame, and the endgame had Dominic Thorne's estate at its center, which meant that everything Marcus was about to do had two effects, not one. The first effect was the one that was straightforwardly his. The recovery of concealed marital assets, the sanction of his former wife for financial fraud in the proceedings, the protection of what he had spent years building. The second effect was one that Vivian had not seen coming because she had, in her confidence, made a fundamental error. She had assumed that erasing Marcus from the photographs was equivalent to erasing him from the relevant universe. She had assumed that a man she had removed from the visual record of her life would remain, by extension, removed from the professional and financial records that governed the world she was moving into. Yet she had forgotten that Marcus Hale's profession was finding exactly the things that people believed they had hidden. And she had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, that the world she was moving into was one that Marcus had touched before she ever arrived in it. Dominic Thorne had been introduced to Marcus Hale in 2019 at a dinner hosted by a mutual contact in commercial real estate. They had spoken for perhaps 40 minutes, which was enough time for Marcus to assess Thorne as serious and decent and worth knowing, and enough time for Thorne to, apparently, form a similar impression, because he had called Marcus's office 3 weeks later to ask his opinion on a financial forensics question related to a development dispute, and Marcus had given him a thorough, useful answer, and Thorne had said, "You're good at this?" in the way that people who are themselves good at things recognize the quality in others. They had not been close, but they had maintained what Marcus would describe as a genuine professional regard. The kind of relationship that is not frequent but is real, and that exists in the space between acquaintance and friend, without quite arriving at either. He had not spoken to Dominic Thorne since his divorce proceedings had begun. But he knew, with the specific, evidence-based confidence of someone who has studied a person's professional history for 7 months, that Dominic Thorne was a man who had built his entire career on careful due diligence. He did not make large commitments without full information. He trusted his own judgment, but he respected the integrity of his information sources. And he had a particular, undocumented sensitivity to financial misrepresentation, because in 2008, he had been defrauded by a business partner who had concealed liabilities in a deal structure, and the experience had cost him 4 years and $40 million to resolve. Vivian had chosen her next destination with precision. What she had not fully accounted for was that the terrain she was moving into had been mapped before she arrived. The motion was filed in the 2nd week of November. Elena handled the filing with the exact, controlled aggression of someone who had been waiting to deploy a fully loaded argument and was not inclined toward theatrics. The motion was 63 pages. It included the bank records documenting the transfer of $240,000 from their joint savings account to the Delaware LLC, and it included the title search and property appraisal for 14 Carrington Lane. It included the certified registrations for both shell entities, with dates that placed their formation squarely within the active divorce proceedings. It included the certified copies of Vivian's financial affidavits, with the relevant omissions highlighted in precise, clinical footnotes. It also included a referral letter to the State Bar's Professional Conduct Committee. Marcus had not filed the motion with any particular flourish. He had reviewed the final draft on a Sunday evening with his second cup of coffee and the same methodical attention he gave to any document that was going to matter, noting 2 small corrections that needed to be made before filing. And then, he had sent Elena an approval email and closed his laptop. He had not celebrated. And he had not felt elation. What he felt was the specific, quiet satisfaction of a calculation resolving correctly, not the satisfaction of winning, but the satisfaction of precision, of the numbers coming out where the evidence said they should. The legal machinery moved. It did not move quickly. It never does. But it moved with the particular weight of a court system that has discovered it has been lied to, which is a specific kind of institutional momentum that does not pause easily once it begins. Vivian's attorney filed a response in 2 weeks. The response was good, her attorney was good, but it was responding to a record that had already been built, and responding to a completed record is a fundamentally different exercise than building one. It conceded several of the factual allegations while disputing their characterization. It argued that the property in Westbrook County had been acquired with funds that were not marital property. It did not explain, with any specificity, where those funds had come from. Elena filed a supplemental brief in response to the response. The supplemental brief was 12 pages. It asked 4 questions. $41,000 had moved from Vivian's personal account in November 2021 to an account associated with the Delaware LLC. Where had the $41,000 come from? The $3.8 million used to purchase the Carrington Lane property had been transferred from a holding account at a Connecticut bank. Whose account? The property appraisal identified the current assessed value at $4.2 million. What was the source and date of the funds that capitalized the differential? And the 4th question, the quiet one, had Vivian Ashford disclosed, at any point in the divorce proceedings, the existence of any interest, direct or indirect, in any trust instrument or estate plan executed by any third party with whom she maintained a personal relationship? The 4th question landed the way Elena had intended it to land. Marcus knew it had landed because 3 days after the supplemental brief was filed, Vivian's attorney called Elena to request an extension on their discovery response. Extensions in litigation are normal. Extensions requested urgently, with the particular slightly breathless quality of an attorney who has just run a document to ground that their client has not prepared them for, are something different. They didn't know about the trust, Elena told Marcus on the phone that evening. I know, he said. Her attorney didn't know she was in the estate plan. I know. Which means Vivian didn't tell her own attorney about the most significant financial asset in her post-divorce picture. Which means she knew it was relevant to the proceedings and chose not to disclose it. There was a pause. Marcus, Elena said, this is going to be a problem for her. Yes, he said. He did not say anything more. There was nothing more that needed saying. It was the photograph that started it, and it was a photograph that cracked it open. Not one of the edited ones, a new one, posted to a Society Page's Instagram account 3 days after the supplemental brief was filed. It showed Vivian and Dominic Thorne at a benefit dinner in Manhattan, the kind of event that exists in a specific stratum of the city's social geography. Not quite gala formal, but close. The women in expensive dresses and the men in suits that said they had the option of a tuxedo, but considered it vulgar. And Vivian was wearing a gold dress that caught the camera light precisely as it was designed to, and Dominic had his hand on her back in a way that was public and comfortable and confirmed. Marcus saw the photograph because Elena had sent it to him with a single-word message. Timing. He looked at the photograph for a while. Dominic Thorne looked. He searched for the right word, not generous or unkind, but accurate. He looked like a man who believed in what he was standing next to. There was something in the quality of his attention, even in a photograph, that Marcus recognized. It was the look of a serious person who had allowed himself to feel secure. As Marcus thought about Dominic's documented sensitivity to financial misrepresentation, about the 2008 case and the 4 years and the $40 million, he thought about the specific, cruel geometry of what Vivian was doing. Not cruel in a theatrical sense. Cruel in the practical, structural sense. She was moving into the life of a man who had already been damaged by deception, having already begun to build the financial architecture that would protect her interests in the event that the relationship consolidated into something permanent, and having done so in a way that would, when it came to light, demonstrate precisely the quality of character that Dominic Thorne had the most reason to fear. Marcus did not feel satisfaction about this. He wanted to be clear about that to himself. What the satisfaction was in the precision of the legal work, not in the outcome for Vivian, which was an outcome she had built for herself. His role was not destruction. His role was accurate accounting. He was doing what he had always done, making the hidden numbers visible. He put his phone down and went back to work. Dominic Thorne had not contacted Marcus Hale in 3 years. The last message between them had been a brief, cordial exchange in early 2022, before the divorce, before any of this, about a development project that had nothing to do with anything that came after. Marcus had not expected to hear from him. He had not reached out. Their professional regard was real, but it was not the kind that compelled contact across the particular awkwardness of circumstances this complex. He heard from Dominic on a Wednesday in December. It was at 7:15 in the morning, when his phone rang with a number he recognized. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Marcus." Dominic Thorne's voice was the same as he remembered it. Quiet, with the particular steadiness of a man who has conducted a large number of important conversations and has learned not to spend his voice on register. "Dominic," Marcus said. A pause. "I need to talk to you." "All right. Not on the phone. I'd rather—" A brief silence. "I'm in Philadelphia on Thursday. Could we meet?" Marcus thought about this for a moment. He thought about what it meant that Dominic was calling. He thought about what Dominic must have learned in the last 2 weeks. And he thought about what it must feel like to be Dominic Thorne on the morning he had decided to make this call. "Yes," Marcus said. "I know a place." They met at a coffee shop in Old City that Marcus had chosen for reasons that were partly practical. Good coffee, corner tables with actual privacy, no chance of running into anyone either of them knew, and partly because there was something fitting about a place that was unglamorous and real. No performance, no architecture, just the smell of coffee grounds, and a window looking out at a street doing what streets do in December, which is absorb the gray light and hold it without complaint. Dominic Thorne looked like a man who had not slept well. He was dressed well, he always was, and it appeared to be constitutive for him, but there was something around his eyes and in the careful set of his jaw that told Marcus this was a man in the process of absorbing information he hadn't wanted and was still doing the work of deciding what to do with it. He was already at the table when Marcus arrived. He stood when Marcus entered, and they shook hands with the genuine but slightly formal warmth of two people who respect each other across a gap of complication. They ordered coffee. The server left. Outside, a delivery truck was double-parked, and its driver was arguing with someone, the ordinary street noise of a city morning. "You filed a motion," Dominic said. "I did." "It was in the court record." "Yes." Dominic wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "You allege she was in my estate plan." Marcus said nothing. "She is in my estate plan," Dominic said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, offered in the tone of someone who is deciding to be honest and wants to establish that clearly. I revised it 9 months ago. I know, Marcus said. Dominic looked at him. How? Estate trust instruments filed with the Connecticut Probate Court are public record when the trust is registered as a revocable trust with a qualified personal residence trust election on the primary asset. You used a QPRT for the Greenwich property. A pause. I didn't know that, Dominic said. Most people don't. It's one of the reasons financial forensics exists. Dominic looked down at his coffee. Did you know, he said, with the careful, slightly formal precision of a man choosing his words very deliberately. When we met 3 years ago, did you know that she and I— No, Marcus said. I didn't know anything about you and Vivian until after I filed for divorce. The overlap is, it's not what you're thinking. Dominic nodded slowly. The property, he said. The one in Westbrook County. Sable Meridian Holdings. I bought it. I titled it in an entity I set up for her. It was— He stopped. Started again. I intended it as a gift, a significant one. I understood, I believed, that her divorce was proceeding cleanly, that there were no complications. She told you the divorce was proceeding cleanly. She did. Marcus said nothing. It wasn't proceeding cleanly, Dominic said. No. Another pause. Longer this time. The delivery truck outside had resolved its argument and moved on. And the coffee shop had settled into its mid-morning quiet. A woman at the next table was writing something in a paper notebook, her pen moving in steady, unhurried strokes. There's something I need to ask you, Dominic said. And I want you to understand that I'm asking because I know your reputation, in the professional sense, and I think you're a person who will answer me honestly. Ask. Dominic looked up from his coffee. His eyes were steady and careful, and held the specific quality of a man who is about to say something that costs him something. The money she transferred out of your joint account, the $240,000. Yes. Did she tell you about it? Did you know she was doing it? No. Did she discuss your finances with you openly? Marcus thought about the years of their marriage. About the way Vivian had always engaged with the practical realities of their shared financial life, competently, fluently, with the ease of someone who was comfortable with complexity. The way she had insisted on splitting expenses evenly at the beginning, which he had respected. The way that had gradually shifted as their incomes diverged, not dramatically but measurably. The way she had proposed the joint savings account in 2020 as a vehicle for their long-term goals, which he had agreed to without suspicion, because suspicion was not something he had carried into that marriage. We discussed our finances, he said. I thought openly I was wrong. Dominic was quiet for a moment. I've been trying, he said slowly, to understand the sequence, the timing of all of this. When it began, and the divorce, and the property. The transfer from our joint account happened 6 months before I filed, Marcus said. The Delaware LLC was registered around the same time. The Connecticut entity, Sable Meridian Holdings, was registered 8 months after I filed. The property purchase was 11 months ago. Dominic absorbed this. She was building something, he said. Yes. Using the money she transferred from your account as the seed capital. That's the forensic conclusion. The Delaware LLC received $240,000 from a personal account in her name. That personal account received 3 separate transfers from our joint savings account in October 2021. The LLC then made 2 investments that returned approximately $70,000 over 12 months. That capital, Basso, combined with your contribution toward the Westbrook County property, created the structure you now see. Dominic Thorne looked at him for a long moment. Marcus, he said, I'm going to ask you one more thing, and then I'll leave you alone. Go ahead. She removed you from photographs. His voice was flat, factual. She did. I saw some of them. She showed me a photograph of the two of you once, early on, from your wedding. You weren't in it. Marcus said nothing. I thought that was strange, Dominic said. I remember thinking, that's strange. She told me you'd been married, but she was alone in every photograph. I thought it was just that she had edited them for her own reasons, her own healing. It wasn't healing, Marcus said. No. Dominic's jaw tightened slightly. Oh, it was preparation. Yes. The word sat between them in the quiet of the coffee shop, among the ordinary sounds of the morning. A chair scraping, a coffee machine running, a phone buzzing on a table nearby. I remember you from that dinner, Dominic said finally. 3 years ago. I remember telling my wife, actually, that I'd met someone interesting. In a professional sense. I told Catherine about you. Marcus said nothing. Vivian never mentioned that she knew you, in any context, not as a former husband, not even, he stopped. I asked her once if she knew you, after I'd seen your name on something. She said no. The admission landed quietly. She said no, Dominic repeated, more to himself than to Marcus. Outside, the November light was doing its flat, particular thing to the street, whereas a woman walked past the window with a small child, both of them bundled against the cold, the child's hat slightly crooked. I need to revise my estate plan, Dominic said. That would be advisable, Marcus said. You should also speak with a financial forensics attorney about the property transfer, specifically regarding the gift tax implications and whether any element of the transfer structure might create exposure for you in the context of her divorce proceedings. I can give you a name if you'd like. Dominic looked at him steadily. You're not... He started to say something and stopped. What? You're not what I expected in this conversation. Marcus drank his coffee. It had gone slightly cold. He didn't mind. What did you expect? Dominic thought about it. I expected you to be harder. Oh, about all of this. Marcus looked out the window for a moment. The work is precise, he said. That doesn't require hardness. It requires accuracy. Dominic nodded slowly. I know what that means. In real estate, we call it due diligence. It's the same principle. A pause. She told me, Dominic said, that your marriage had been failing for years before the end, that you had both been unhappy, that the divorce had been mutual. Marcus said nothing. I don't think any of that was accurate, Dominic said. No, Marcus said. It wasn't. Dominic stood. He was a tall man, and he carried his height with the particular upright gravity of someone who has had decades to make peace with the attention it brings. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. Thank you for meeting me, he said. Of course. Dominic paused, and he looked at Marcus for a moment with the specific quality of attention that Marcus had noted in the photograph, the look of a man taking accurate measure of what is in front of him. I'm sorry, he said. For my part, for the timing of it, for what that meant. You were deceived, Marcus said. That's not the same as culpability. Dominic put on his coat. She was very good at it, he said. The picture she painted, of her life, of who she was. She is very good at it, Marcus said. She always was. Dominic buttoned his coat. I should have done more due diligence. He left the tip on the table himself, a gesture Marcus noticed without commenting on, and walked out of the coffee shop into the cold Philadelphia morning. The proceedings moved through the winter with the particular, a relentless momentum that legal cases acquire when the evidentiary record is solid and the subject of the motion cannot find a clean counter-argument. There were delays. There are always delays. And there were filings and counter-filings, and the occasional pointed letter between attorneys that did not advance anyone's position, but served as an outlet for the specific frustration of being on the wrong side of a well-documented case. The court ordered a formal forensic accounting in January. The forensic accountant appointed by the court was a woman named Dr. Claire Sung, who had worked in financial forensics for 22 years and had a particular reputation for finding things that other accountants had not found, which was the only kind of reputation in that field that mattered. Dr. Sung's report was filed in March. It was thorough, and it confirmed the transfer of $240,000 from the joint savings account to the personal account and subsequently to the Delaware LLC. It confirmed the capitalization of that LLC through a combination of the initial funds and subsequent returns. It traced a wire transfer of $960,000 from the Delaware LLC to a Connecticut holding account in August of the prior year, 4 months before the Carrington Lane purchase, and identified the source of the remaining capital for the property purchase as a separate wire from an account registered to Thorne Capital Group's real estate development subsidiary. It also found something Marcus had not found. In the estate plan revision, Dominic Thorne had filed with the Connecticut Probate Court. What the Qualified Personal Residence Trust for the Greenwich property had been structured with a specific provision. Upon Dominic's death, if the primary beneficiary was the spouse or domestic partner of the settlor at time of death, the trust assets transferred without certain tax consequences that would otherwise apply. This provision had been added to the standard instrument by an amendment filed 6 months ago, during the active divorce proceedings, in a modification that bore the initials of the drafting attorney. The drafting attorney was a partner at a firm whose corporate law department maintained a documented cross-referral relationship with the mid-size firm where Vivian had made partner. Dr. Sung had flagged this connection in a footnote. The footnote was 5 lines long. It was the kind of footnote that changes the shape of a document entirely. Marcus read Dr. Sung's report in one sitting on a Saturday morning with his first cup of coffee and the particular quality of concentration he brought to documents that mattered. When he finished, he sat with it for a while. Outside his office window, the March light was doing something it had not done since November, coming through with actual warmth, not just brightness, the specific warmth that means the season is genuinely changing. He thought about the footnote. He thought about the specific sequence it implied. Vivienne, who was a corporate attorney and understood trust instruments, who had introduced herself into the professional orbit of Dominic Thorne's estate planning attorney, who had ensured that the beneficiary provision in the QPRT amendment was structured in a way that maximized her inheritance position, had done all of this while simultaneously conducting divorce proceedings in which she had disclosed none of it. It was meticulous. It was genuinely impressive in the specific way that a very precisely constructed piece of fraud is always impressive to someone who is trained to recognize the construction. And it had the particular quality of work that collapses all at once rather than gradually, because every element that made it meticulous also made it recoverable. Every precise move left a precise record. Every carefully concealed connection existed in a document somewhere, and documents were findable if you knew what you were looking for and had the patience to look. And he put the report down and called Elena. "I read it," she said before he could speak. "The footnote," he said. The footnote changes the character of the case significantly. It does. We're not just talking about undisclosed marital assets anymore. We're talking about potential fraud on the court. We're talking about a scheme that used her professional expertise and her professional connections to manipulate a third party's estate plan during ongoing divorce proceedings. Yes. Elena paused. The bar complaint becomes significantly stronger. Yes. Marcus. Her voice was careful, precise. The voice she used when she was about to say something that required him to think before responding. If this goes where it appears to be going, the bar referral, the contempt motion, the forensic report, she's looking at disbarment proceedings. It was at minimum a significant suspension, possibly criminal fraud charges depending on how the DA's office evaluates the scheme element. Marcus was quiet. I need to ask you something, Elena said. Go ahead. Is that what you want? He looked out the window at the March light, the warmth in it, the particular quality of a day that is about to become genuinely good. He thought about the photographs. He always came back to the photographs, because they were the most accurate representation of what Vivian had intended. Not just the affair, not just the financial manipulation, but the specific, deliberate act of removing him from the record, of hiring someone to adjust the shadows and correct the light and fill in the space where he had stood. The statement it made about how she valued the time they had shared, about what she believed a person becomes when you decide you are finished with them. He thought about it for a long time. I want what the evidence supports, he said. Whatever the appropriate legal outcome is, given the full record. I'm not in the business of asking for more than the facts justify or less than the law allows. Elena said nothing for a moment. All right, she said. Then let me do my job. The settlement conference was held in April. It was not a pleasant meeting. Marcus had not expected it to be. He sat on one side of a conference room table with Elena, and Vivian sat on the other side with her attorney, and the court-appointed mediator sat at the head. And the room had the specific low-temperature atmosphere of a space that has been prepared for a difficult conversation that everyone in it already knows the outcome of. Vivian looked composed. She had always been able to look composed when it mattered. She was wearing a dark suit and her hair was up, and she looked like exactly what she was, a corporate attorney at a formal proceeding. Marcus looked at her for a moment at the beginning of the session, not with any particular emotion, just with the observational accuracy he brought to things that required it. And he noted that she looked tired under the composure. Not dramatically, just slightly. The specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying a complex weight for a long time and knows the carrying is almost over. Their eyes met once, briefly, at the start of the session. He could not read what was in hers. He no longer tried. The mediator read through the terms of the proposed settlement modification. The $240,000 plus interest to be returned to Marcus from the proceeds of the Delaware LLC's assets. An additional sum representing Marcus's share of the appreciation on the Chestnut Hill house for the period it had been on the market. A revised accounting of the investment accounts, with the fund stake valued on the basis Marcus had originally argued for. The Carrington Lane property to remain in litigation pending the resolution of the contempt motion. Vivian's attorney made several objections. Each objection was addressed by a numbered reference to the forensic accounting report. The objections stopped. The session lasted 4 hours. At the end of it, whilst the settlement modification had been agreed in principle, and the contempt motion would be heard by the judge in 3 weeks. When it was over, Marcus and Elena gathered their documents in silence. The mediator left. Vivian's attorney left. For a moment, it was just the two of them, Marcus and Vivian, on opposite sides of the conference room table, in the particular silence that exists after a formal proceeding in which a great deal has been said and decided, and nothing personal has been addressed. Vivian looked at him. "You found everything," she said. It was not a question. "I found what was there to find," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think you would." He picked up his briefcase. "I know." "Marcus." He stopped. He looked at her. He waited. She opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face that he didn't have a name for. The same complicated expression from the kitchen doorway, 3 years ago, in the flickering light. "I did love you," she said. "For a long time. I want you to know that." He looked at her for a moment. "I know you did," he said. He picked up his coat. "The photographs," she said. He stopped at the door. "I know I should—" She stopped, started again. "I know what it looked like." "What did it look like?" he said. She didn't answer. He walked out. The contempt hearing was in May. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Patricia So, who had a reputation for having very little patience for financial games in divorce proceedings, or which was a reputation that had taken her approximately 2 decades to build, and which she wore with the quiet authority of someone who has nothing left to prove. Judge So read the forensic report with visible attention. She asked 7 questions, which Elena answered with the composed precision of a woman who had prepared for each of them. She asked Vivian's attorney 3 questions, which were answered less composedly. At the end of the hearing, Judge So cited Vivian for contempt for failing to disclose the Delaware LLC, the Connecticut entity, the Westbrook County property, and the interest in the Thorne Estate Trust instrument in the mandatory financial affidavits. She ordered the Carrington Lane property placed in escrow pending resolution of the underlying financial claims. She formally referred the matter to the state bar with a finding of probable cause. She also made one observation that was not strictly required by the legal record, but which Judge So apparently considered worth stating. She noted that the financial structure at issue had been designed with considerable legal sophistication, that the timing of its construction demonstrated awareness of the ongoing divorce proceedings, and that the involvement of a practicing attorney in the creation of instruments intended to deceive a court was, in her words, a specific and serious kind of wrong. Then she adjourned. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Elena turned to Marcus and said, "You built that case from a screenshot your college roommate sent you." Marcus considered that for a moment. "Porter's very active on Instagram," he said. Elena almost smiled. The bar proceedings moved on their own timeline, which was slower than the court proceedings, but inexorable in its way. Marcus was not deeply involved in them. They were not his to direct. He had provided the documentary record and the referral. What the bar did with it was the bar's business. He heard, through Elena, that the bar had opened a formal investigation. He heard, a month later, that Vivian's firm had placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome. He did not pursue any further information. He had what he needed. The rest was consequence, and consequence has its own momentum. He did not hear from Vivian. He heard from Dominic Thorne once more. In June, a brief email that said, "I wanted you to know that I've revised the estate plan. I thought that was the right thing to do. I hope your year is going better." Marcus had written back, "Thank you for letting me know. I hope yours is as well." He had meant it. He was a person who mostly meant what he said, which was one of the things that made him effective at work, and occasionally difficult in the contexts where saying exactly what you mean is socially inconvenient. What had happened with Dominic had interested him, in a clinical way, from the beginning. Not personally. He had no investment in Dominic's well-being beyond the basic regard of one serious person for another, but professionally, structurally. The estate plan revision meant that Vivian had lost the endgame she had been building toward. Not just the Carrington Lane property, which was in escrow. Not just the Delaware LLC assets, which were being returned, but the long play. The architecture she had been constructing with such deliberate, quiet precision over 4 years of marriage and 14 months of divorce proceedings. The structure she had believed was invisible because she had believed Marcus was gone. Removed from the photographs. Removed from the relevant geography. Removed from the spaces where things that mattered were built. She had built the whole thing on that assumption. And the assumption had been wrong. Because you cannot edit a person out of a photograph and expect them to behave as though they are edited. You cannot adjust the shadows and correct the light and expect the original exposure to stop existing. The record does not disappear when the image does. The numbers do not vanish when the woman who moved them changes her surname. Marcus Hale was a person who dealt in records. Esomos, the specific, unalterable persistence of documented truth. It was his profession, and in a way he had never found the need to articulate, his nature. He was a person who had always understood that the most important things in a life were not the visible surfaces, the photographs, the suits, the addresses, the narratives people constructed about who they had been and who they were becoming. But the underlying structures, the instruments, the transfers, the entities, the paper trails that wound through the architecture of a financial life, like stitching through fabric, invisible until something pulls. He had built a career on following those threads. He had built a case on one that led directly back to the woman who had hired someone to remove him from every image of the life they had shared. She had taken him out of every frame. She had corrected every shadow. She had rebuilt the visual record of 6 years, as though he had never stood in any of those places, never been the warm body beside her in the August humidity, never seen the particular green of the Kyoto bamboo in the morning before the crowds arrived. But the financial records remained. The account statements remained. The wire transfers and entity registrations and probate filings and deed instruments and appraisal reports remained. They sat in the public record and in the archived files of accountants and attorneys and county clerks, patient and specific and entirely unedited, waiting for a person who knew where to look. He had looked. In July, when he received a package from a gallery in Manhattan that he had connected with through a mutual contact years ago, and had apparently been on their mailing list ever since. Inside was a catalog for a new exhibition, contemporary photography, the kind he rarely attended, but occasionally found interesting in theory. He almost put it directly in recycling. He looked at the cover photograph instead. It was a photograph of a woman standing alone in a room, looking at a wall on which a large framed photograph was hanging. The photograph within the photograph showed 2 people, the woman in the room and a man, standing together somewhere with gray sky and open ground. But in the framed version, the man had been removed. The woman in the room was looking at the photograph of herself, alone, in the landscape from which a person had been excised. The show was called Original Exposure. Marcus looked at it for a while. Then he put the catalog on his desk and poured a cup of coffee, and opened his laptop to the financial model he had been building for a new client, a commercial real estate developer in New Jersey with a complex debt structure and a partner dispute that had been going on for 3 years and showed all the signs of resolving badly unless someone introduced some precision into it. He started working. Outside his window, the July afternoon was warm and specific, and fully itself, the kind of afternoon that carries no weight except the weight of what is actually in it. His phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at it. A message from Porter Walsh. "Dude, I just saw something about Vivian's firm. Is everything okay?" Marcus looked at the message. Mad, he put the phone face down and kept working. Some things did not require a response. Some things were simply what they were. A record, accurately stated. A number, correctly calculated. A document, properly filed. And some people discover, too late, that the man they removed from every photograph was the only person in the room who understood what the photographs were actually worth. His phone buzzed again. He didn't look.
It's not easy. It's definitely a process and whatnot to press vinyl and whatnot. I have a record player, but I don't think it's it's like a cheap one that I bought from, I think my wife got it for me from Target or something. I've always wanted to like get it set up and like get some like subs and whatnot. I just never got around to doing it. I think it's sitting in my garage now. One of the coolest things she got me was, I don't know if you know the band Acceptance. They came out with one album, and like, Phantoms. They dropped a new album like a couple of years ago, I think. But they came out